everyone's time, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Lindsay Hauer. I work on the philanthropy team with the Nature Conservancy in the California chapter. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to acknowledge we've got a terrific crew joining us today. We've got some staff, we've got some of our California Leadership Council members, a few of our trustees, all of you are supporters, and we're so grateful for your interest and your support and enthusiasm for the work that we do at the Conservancy. I'm going to just give you an overview of the next hour, and then I want to introduce our speakers. So we're going to have a chunk of time at the start with some program content from our three speakers. They will be talking from slides, and then we will do what I'm calling kind of a team Q&A that I will kick off and answer. I'll ask a few questions of our speakers, and then I'll pass it over to all of you to do an audience Q&A, and I'll facilitate that. And I welcome you to either use the raise the hand function in Zoom, or else feel free to use the chat. Or if there's a lull and there's just time, feel free to also just, go off and ask your question directly. And then we'll close at the end of the hour. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our three speakers who you'll be hearing from. First, Sarah Hurd, who's our director of MarketLab, which is a unique function here at the Conservancy in California. And it uses economics and finance to accelerate conservation by using rigorous economic modeling, creating new markets and incentives, and leveraging private capital to benefit people and nature. Sarah has 20 years of experience in the fields of environmental economics, policy, and strategy. Next up will be our TNC lead scientist for the climate program, Dr. Sophie Parker, who provides science guidance to support and enhance biodiversity in urban areas while tackling challenges such as stormwater management. And she also has over 20 years of experience in ecology and conservation science. And then Dr. Brad Franklin, who is a TNC applied economist, working on the MarketLab team. And he uses his expertise in environmental and natural resource economics to assess the value of nature-based solutions in promoting our conservation goals. So before I pass it over to Sarah, our team really wants to encourage an interactive dialogue here. And so we want to kick it off by asking an opening question that highlights, or that we hope will highlight, how we're all connected to lithium. And that is to ask you all to consider, have you ever driven or been driven in an electric vehicle? And I welcome you to drop your answers in the chat. We can get an idea of all of your awareness and exposure to EVs. Seeing a couple of yeses, a couple more. Have you ever driven or been driven in an EV? Driving a Tesla, thank you. Great. All right. Well, so my sense is, all right, Mike Finney, since 2010, you were early on with this technology, good for you. So we get a sense that, in fact, we're all pretty aware of how we're all connected to lithium. So we're going to have a great conversation ahead of us. So I'll pass it over to Sarah Hurd to get us started. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. I'm really excited to see a bunch of new faces and also some folks I recognize. And it's just really great to have you all here. I'm Sarah Hurd, and I lead our MarketLab team. And I'm really excited to be holding our first MarketLab Salon of 2022. Our goal is to do about 3 or 4 of these each year, and we use each one to dive deeply into a specific topic. So today's focus will be our work on lithium mining and the role of economics in guiding policy to make sure that we minimize the environmental impacts of extracting this really important resource. But before we dive in, I'd like to set the stage a bit. For those of you who are new to TNC, we were founded in 1951, and since then, we've grown to be the largest conservation organization in the world. We are in every state in over 75 countries, and our goal is to protect nature while also benefiting people so that we can thrive together. We aim for impact at scale, and to date, we have protected over 120 million acres of land across the globe. In California, our work ranges from reducing the risk of catastrophic wildfire by restoring forests in the Sierra Nevada, to making sure we have enough flows in our rivers for species like salmon and steelhead to migrate, to rebuilding the collapsed groundfish fishery by using sustainable harvesting practices, and a whole lot more. California is TNC's largest chapter, And that means we're really lucky to have resources that are unique within TNC. MarketLab is a great example of this. MarketLab harnesses the power of economics and finance to accelerate our conservation priorities. TNC has used a market-based approach to conservation since its earliest days, starting with protecting land by buying it. So this work really is part of our DNA. But what's new about MarketLab is we are a dedicated team with specialized skills in economics, finance, and business strategy. We partner with our conservation and science colleagues to unlock new policies, new tools, and new funding streams that align people and nature. We're really passionate about this work because we see how much smarter and faster we can move if we tap into markets. And if we're going to meet the challenges of the coming decade and deliver on our vision of nature and people thriving together, we need all the tools we can get. MarketLab's work is organized into 3 broad pillars, and each one is led by a subject matter expert. The first is what we call making the business case. And this is really all about economics. So for example, quantifying the savings to solar developers by siting new projects outside of sensitive habitats. This helps reduce things like permitting costs and litigation risk. And our analysis is helping to pursue policy change with state energy regulators. Our second pillar is what we call designing market interventions. And this is really all about creating new tools or markets that incentivize conservation, but also using business strategy to unlock transformative approaches. And this is really where the sausage is made because we're aiming for proofs of concept. So for example, we recently created the first insurance product that accounts for the risk reduction benefits of forest restoration and reduces premiums for homeowners and businesses who invest in forest restoration. MarketLab's third pillar is called infusing blended finance. And this is all about tapping private capital to unlock access to more funding so that we move much more quickly and nimbly. We're using low interest loans and an internal revolving loan fund to acquire more land in our pipeline faster. The focus of today's webinar is on our first pillar, and I'm really excited to dive deeper into our work on lithium mining and economics. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sophie and let her and Brad take it from here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks everybody for joining today. And it sounds like, based on the responses to the chat, that folks have some familiarity with lithium based on which kinds of cars you're driving or have been driven in. But we wanted to take a minute to step back and just ask this question: why are we interested in lithium at all? And first off, we all know that we are facing a global climate change emergency. In order to address that crisis, we're in the process of a big societal shift towards green energy. And that green energy transition is occurring not just in the transportation sector, it's also occurring in the energy sector itself. So we're transitioning away from burning coal and oil and other fossil fuels to gathering electricity from the sun and from the wind. And in the process of that transition, we have to recognize that the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow when and where we need to use electricity. So we have to have a way of storing it. Lithium-ion batteries are a part of that storage solution. We're using them in cars, but we're also going to be using them as part of our electricity grid. Now, there is a global marketplace for lithium, and you're going to hear more from Brad about that, but we should also acknowledge that there are lithium resources here in the United States. We're only producing about 1% of that global market in the United States. There's only one place where lithium is currently produced in the US, and that's at Silver Peak, Nevada. But there are big stores of hard rocks, clays, and brines, underground salty water, that contain lithium. And those are being explored, and they have the potential to be places where we're going to be extracting lithium in the future. We know that extraction from these different sources has impacts. And so that's one of the reasons that the Nature Conservancy is interested in lithium, is to try and understand what that extraction involves, what those impacts are, where are they across the United States, and what does this future of potential lithium production look like? Finally, of course, we all use lithium every day in lithium-ion batteries that are in our cell phones, in our computers. And so it's something that we should all be thinking about. So for these reasons, we put together a lithium extraction impacts analysis team, which involves TNC staff and some external consultants in 9 states across the continental US. I'm leading this team. We have a spatial analysis expert. We have Brad Franklin, who's doing our economics analysis. We're working with a student at UCLA to do some policy work. We also have a groundwater expert. We have someone, a scientist from the Nevada chapter, who's our Nevada expert, which is really a place where lithium production is already occurring and very likely to occur in the future. And we are, of course, collaborating with our external affairs team. Those are the folks who talk to elected officials and local legislatures at also the state and at the federal level. And then we've pulled in some external expertise in order to do this analysis. So there's 3 parts to what we're doing. The first part is just a look at environmental impacts. So we're digging in to see where are these places that we're likely to be extracting lithium and what are the potential impacts of that. The second part of the analysis is the economics piece. And the third part is policy recommendations. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the environmental impacts analysis. And the first part of that is to determine where is production likely to occur. So we've begun to map that, and I'll show you a map of that in a minute. And then secondly, we're looking at what's involved. What does lithium production actually mean? What are the techniques that are used? What are the resources that are being tapped? And as that extraction of lithium is occurring, what are the potential impacts? So how does that impact the plants, animals, and natural communities that the Nature Conservancy cares about? So in order to look at that, we look at each location where lithium may be extracted, and we determine what are the environmental concerns there. Are there rare plants? Are there other endangered species that we should be concerned about? Are there natural communities that are rare, or are there groundwater resources? So those are some of the things that we would be mapping. And finally, we bring that all together and we are pulling together all those resources in order to map the impacts of lithium extraction. So here's what this is beginning to look like. And we're in the process of doing this mapping right now in collaboration with our colleagues and all these TNC chapters. There are 9 states where we've identified lithium resources that are shown in that light pink color that are likely to be extracted based on interest from the mining industry. These include states in the Western US and also in there's also Arkansas and North Carolina that are involved. And the different colors that are shown within those pink blobs represent the different types of extraction that may occur. So let's talk a little bit about what those different extraction types are. So first off, we have surface mining. This is where the extraction is of rock or of clay that's right at the surface of the soil, and it is either scraped up by bulldozers or other heavy equipment, and that those rocks are gathered together and then processed. Similarly, open pit mining is also to gather together the rocks or clays where the lithium materials are found. But in the case of open pit mining, it's not just scraping the surface, it's actually digging down and making a deeper pit into the ground. Underground mining doesn't leave a big pit in the earth, but actually go in through the side, like into a mountain or down some kind of shaft. There are lithium resources that could be accessed through underground mining, but they're probably the least likely to be developed because those mines are small. Most of them are in the West. There are claims for lithium, but they're not the big lithium production sites that are likely to be developed. Now, there's 2 other kinds of extraction, and these are very different from the extraction from hard rock or clay. One is called evaporative concentration from brine. So brine, again, is salty water located underground in a lens or an aquifer. And in order to do evaporative concentration of lithium from brine, what people do is they pump that brine to the surface. They create a big pool, a big evaporative pond. They allow the brine to sit out in the sun and evaporate the water off so that the lithium gets concentrated. Then they take that and process it more in order to extract the lithium. Now, another way to get at lithium from brine is actually to do what's called direct extraction. So instead of evaporating the water off, what can happen is, and I'll show this in the next slide, you actually pump the brine to the surface, and instead of evaporating it, you somehow pool the lithium out, either through a chemical or physical means. And what's shown in the picture here are these little beads that are attracted to the lithium ion and hold on to that. And those can potentially be used to do direct extraction. So here's a depiction of what that direct extraction could look like. You have this geothermal reservoir. This is where the brine is located underground. On the left-hand part of the slide, you have a production well. So this is where the brine is pumped to the surface. It comes up to the surface, and you can see in that tube in the middle that there's all these different elements that are contained in that brine. In addition to lithium, there's iron and silicon and sodium and calcium. And what folks really want is they want to get at the lithium. So there has to be some kind of chemical process or some kind of physical process to separate out that lithium stream, which you can see up on the top where it says Li, that's the lithium coming off. And then the rest of what's in that brine gets re-injected back into the reservoir. So according to this process, there should be no water that's wasted or released because that brine goes back below ground. So we have begun to map specifically the different sites, the different types of extraction across the US. I'm just showing Southern California here. You can see the coast there, and you can see the Salton Sea. There are a variety of different potential extraction sites, and they're actually of different technologies and different types of resources that are being extracted here. And what we're doing with this mapping is to lay on top of that map of the potential extraction sites, the plants, animals, natural communities, other resources that may be of concern. This map shows you species of concern, and those are shown in that kind of orangey color. And you can see how those intersect with the potential extraction locations in a few places. Another example is here's wildlife corridors also mapped. You can see where those intersect with the extraction locations. So we can take a bunch of layers like this and lay them on top and answer the question of what potential resources may be impacted by extraction. Now I'm going to turn it over to Brad to talk about the economics piece of the analysis.
Thanks, Sophie. Yeah, so at the global level, what we've seen in terms of lithium production is kind of a ramping up over the last decade or so, and especially in the last 5 years. So there were about 100,000 metric tons of pure lithium produced last year. And currently it looks like demand is kind of growing by something like 30% a year. So that means that the global market may double by 2025. And so the source of the demand growth is really driven by lithium-ion batteries. So while there are other applications, industrial applications of lithium-ion batteries are about 70 to 75% of the market and growing. And among the batteries, really what's driving growth there the most is electric vehicles. And so electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles are really projected to take off. I mean, they've kind of exceeded expectations the last few years. And so, yeah, and that's partially driven by, fast adoption in China, which is so leading the world. This is kind of the graph on the right is kind of showing you how the cumulative sales kind of by country or region. So China has purchased about roughly three times as many EVs as the US to date. And so corresponding to this, to the supply and the demand from EV, what we've seen in the last year is a big ramping up of lithium prices. So on the Chinese market, from 2021 to 2022, lithium carbonate, one of the key mineral deposits used for batteries, the price of that increased about eightfold, from something like $8,000 per ton to about $64,000 per ton. And so this is an indication, of course, that demand is kind of, outpacing supply. But then we expect that because prices are so high, that more supply will come online very soon. And so then thinking about where the current supply comes from, it's roughly half is coming from Australia currently, and those are hard rock mining operations primarily. And then roughly 30% is coming from South America, from Chile and Argentina, and then those are evaporative concentration operations, basically huge lakes in the desert where they're using to evaporate, to pull off the lithium. And then in China's kind of the third major producer with a roughly 13%, and they have a mix of both evaporative and hard rock mining activities. But then in terms of where, so that's kind of what's been happening, but then where will lithium come from in the future? The USGS has estimated that there's roughly 90 million metric tons scattered around the world. And of that, the US is estimated to have roughly a tenth, somewhere in the 9 to 10 million ton range. And so, then breaking that down across states where the lithium is, this map just shows the top 5 states, but you can see that Nevada at 8.5 million tons is clearly number one in the US, and California being second with a little over 1 million metric tons. And then from left to right, we've got Utah, Arkansas, and North Carolina round out the top 5, all below 500,000 tons each. But then if we think about these supplies in terms of current world demand, and remembering that demand is increasing very quickly. But as of today, this map gives you some indication of how many years worth of world demand we could meet. So Nevada could provide about 85 years worth of demand. And in aggregate, we're talking about something like a century's worth of demand that could be met by US supply. And then to think about kind of, get some sense of the stakes economically for how much could that mean to these states if they really fully develop their lithium resources. In Nevada, again, number one, basically if you took the current value of all their lithium resources and divided it by their annual state GDP, that would be equivalent to about 15 and a half years worth of Nevada's GDP that's in the ground right now, okay? And then California, of course, being the biggest and the biggest state, biggest economy, and highly varied, we see that although number 2 in terms of resources, we're at the state level, we're only talking about 1/10 of 1 year's worth of GDP. But then we see, in other states like Arkansas, 1 year's worth of GDP. So that kind of, you think about a year's worth of GDP, those are stakes that are worth fighting over, worth thinking carefully about. And then, so to give you one example, sort of at a more regional level from California, there's the Salton Sea, which Sophie talked about a little bit, but for those of you who aren't familiar, it's in the southeast corner of the state, and really it's an anomaly. The sea was actually created by an engineering accident where the Colorado River was accidentally diverted and flowed into the desert for a number of years and created the sea. And so then that happened in about 1905, and then kind of through mid-century, mid-20th century, the Salton Sea was a big recreational area with a lot of fishing, boating, what have you. But today, as you can see the bottom picture, that's more representative of the sea today, where it's really ecologically and economically depressed. And the main reason for that is the Salton Sea is an inland sea. It has no access to water, to fresh water coming in. And so it's been shrinking, getting more salty and more polluted over time. But lithium offers potentially a ray of hope for the region. So currently there are geothermal power plants. There's roughly 11 plants operating in the Salton Sea region. And they do what Sophie was talking about before with brine extraction of lithium. But what they're currently doing is pumping brine from under the sea because the brine is hot. And so via heat exchange, they're producing electricity. However, that brine is rich in lithium. So the idea is to essentially build on top of the current operations and to capture that lithium. And so, whereas I told you a few slides ago that there's about 1 million tons in California, well, that's sort of a conservative estimate from the USGS. By some local experts' estimates here in Southern California, there could be 50 to 100 times current world demand under the Salton Sea. So it's huge potential, but there are a lot of unknowns, and including to the region. How much will the region benefit? What kind of jobs are they likely to see? And so that's something that we hope to highlight, if not be able to answer in our analysis. And yeah, so then Andrew Williams is our colleague at UCLA who's leading the policy analysis. And he's really, through stakeholder interviews, hoping to get at some of those bigger questions, thinking about local communities and what's at stake for them. And then also obviously environmental outcomes, and to really to kind of see if we can map out what kind of safeguards need to be in place to ensure good outcomes for everyone. And with that, I think I'm done. I'll hand over control to Lindsay. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Sarah and Sophie and Brad. Really interesting content and also really technical. So we're going to take a few minutes actually to start off with some questions that I'll ask. And folks can listen in and get their questions ready. Again, feel free to use the chat or the raised hand function. I'll facilitate and do my best to keep an eye on, sort of the order of things. But just to kick off, I'm wondering, I'd love to hear from you, Brad. How does lithium extraction relate to the current energy economy?
Sure. Yeah. So, aside from EVs and the dramatic rise of EVs and the realistic goal of phasing out gas guzzling vehicles within a number of decades, which is I don't know if anybody anticipated that 10 years ago, but it's been really amazing. But then also on top of that, as Sophie alluded to, with the transition to a green economy, we have energy sources like wind and solar that have some level of intermittency. So really, battery storage is really crucial to facilitating that transition. And the quicker that we can develop cost-effective battery solutions, the faster that acceleration to a green economy can occur.
Great. And Sophie, typically people think of mining as destructive. And so I'd love if you could share with us, why would an organization like the Nature Conservancy be at all supportive of lithium production in the United States?
That's a great question, Lindsay. I think that there's the big reasons of lithium providing this promise of allowing us to have batteries to store renewable energy, to allow us to address the climate change crisis. That's part of it. I think that there are other potential benefits that can come from lithium extraction, but I think that this is a really interesting topic because it presents TNC with an opportunity to do this kind of cost-benefit analysis, and we're uniquely poised to do that. In part because we've done so much of that already in the renewable energy space by looking at the siting of wind and solar energy with our variety of different projects that we've done on that topic in California, across the West, across the United States now with Power of Place. We've really been looking at how do we do this clean energy transition and not have to lose track of or pave over or destroy the places that are important for conservation. There are ways to achieve the objective of maintaining biodiversity and supporting it and doing this clean energy transition. We've demonstrated that with renewable energy siting. And I think the question is kind of open. Well, what about this new thing, this lithium extraction thing? What is that going to mean? The reason we got involved in thinking about this at all is because we knew so little about it. And we needed to be able to know more about it so that we could understand what's happening, what are the specifics of what's happening, going beyond the generalization of just, oh, lithium provides, rechargeable batteries, and get into the details of where are these extraction sites? What type of extraction is occurring there? Are they all created equal? The answer is no. They are different from one another. And thinking specifically about what that means and how the Nature Conservancy wants to position itself in the future, we have to have that information first. So that's what this team is doing, is trying to generate that information so that we can make good decisions going forward.
Got it. That's truly, when we talk about the Conservancy being, science-based, science-informed, and what you've just described is a really good example of what we do across the board. So thanks for that. And, speaking of which, Sophie, you mentioned that there are some other potential benefits that come from lithium extraction. Do you mind just sharing briefly what those are?
Sure. So some folks have highlighted the potential benefit for economic development, and I think Brad brought that up in relation to the Salton Sea, which is very economically depressed area with a lot of environmental problems, that the potential for a different source of income and a different economy in that region is a real potential benefit, and something that should not be ignored. There's also the potential here to co-align lithium extraction with other industry. And so there's this potential for co-benefits. We see that in the geothermal region of the Salton Sea, but there are other places in the United States where there's potential for co-benefits. In Arkansas, they've been doing brine extraction of bromine for, I think, over 4 decades. So they already do this direct extraction just for a different element. And they now are looking into the potential of expanding that and doing lithium extraction as well. So the benefit is it's avoided conversion benefit. So instead of having to build a new plant and take up new ground just to do lithium, you could potentially couple the lithium extraction on top of existing industry. And that has the potential not just for preventing destruction of habitat and conversion of lands, but it also has a potential cost savings as well. And there are other potential benefits that people have thought about. In Wyoming, there's a site where there is the potential to use an existing place for oil and gas, where there's a shale, an oil and gas extraction location, and where there are basically caverns underground that would be developed through the extraction of brine that goes along with that oil and gas development, where they could store carbon below ground. So you have this potential coupling of 2 and 3 different types of energy and carbon related systems in a single location. I think we just need to get smarter as a society about co-locating a lot of different things, because that's going to solve problems that unitasking systems have developed.
Great. And my last question, and this is just based on lived experience, we often have folks at these MarketLab salons asking about the role of government. So whether at the state level or federal level, would love to hear from both Brad and then Sophie. What role do we at the Conservancy, what would we like to see from state governments and or the federal government in terms of lithium extraction?
Just to start, I think, that we're trying to highlight the kind of the benefits and costs and the relative benefits and costs of different sites in different parts of the country, depending on the local issues and the type of lithium extraction that we're talking about. So, I mean, to that end, I think that we hope to kind of shine a light on these issues to inform policy that would really, potentially incentivize lithium productions in areas where there are, low impacts on the environment and low, disturbance of lands that may be important to local communities, and hopefully sites that will produce jobs for those communities as well.
Yeah, and I would add to that, and I think about this from the perspective of incentives, and what are the incentives that governments can provide to certain kinds of development, either through tax breaks or through direct investment. And as we've seen with the development of solar energy, there can be direct incentives for a particular type of development. And I think that when a government is faced with two or more potential locations and one has all these co-benefits, it would be beneficial to focus on the place where there are the co-benefits and where the cost associated with doing that type of extraction or that type of development are lower. The flip side of that is the stick. There's the carrot and then there's the stick, and you could potentially see a higher cost imposed by governments for doing extraction or development in a place that has that doesn't have co-benefits, or that has really negative consequences for local communities or for the environment. And so that's very non-specific, but I think it's a kind of a basic framework for thinking about what we would advise. And it's also a way for the Nature Conservancy to connect to other groups that are doing environmental justice work, or work with Indigenous communities, or the other types of work that are important, but are not necessarily the focus of the Nature Conservancy.
Got it. Terrific. Well, thank you, Sarah and Sophie and Brad.